He said I was the love of his life. Little did I know that for that man, love only meant my money, and his real family celebrated every penny he managed to take from me. Good afternoon to everyone watching. My name is Eleanor Miller. I'm 84 years old, and today I'm going to tell you a story I've kept secret for many years. A story of betrayal and pain, but also of overcoming adversity. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you watching now to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that my stories reach so many different places. Let's go back to the year 1962. I was 23 years old and worked as a clerk at the only pharmacy in the small town of Pine Grove, Kentucky. My life was simple. I woke up early, worked all day, and returned to the house I shared with my Aunt Martha, who raised me since I was 5 when I lost my parents. Our days were peaceful, without great emotions or surprises. Everything changed when my godmother Celeste passed away. She was a wealthy lady, a widow without children, who always treated me with great affection. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, she left me a considerable inheritance, a beautiful house in the center of town, a piece of land nearby, and a sum of money that, for a simple girl like me, seemed like a fortune. Suddenly, I found myself the most coveted young woman in town, not for my beauty, which was ordinary, but for what I possessed. I remember as if it were yesterday when Walter walked into the pharmacy for the first time. It was a May afternoon, the sky threatening rain. He wasn't from around here. He said he was passing through, representing a pharmaceutical products company from Louisville. Tall, with dark hair combed back, penetrating brown eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up the room. He dressed well, spoke elegantly, and when he addressed someone, he made it seem like that person was the most important in the world. "Miss, could you recommend a good hotel around here? It's my first time in town," he asked, leaning on the counter and looking directly into my eyes. Something in that look left me breathless. Today, I know it was all calculated, every gesture, every word, but back then I was just a small-town girl who thought she knew the world. I recommended Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, the only decent lodging in town. He thanked me, and before leaving, bought an expensive cologne, the kind we normally only sold at Christmas or special occasions. The next day he returned, and the day after as well, always with a different excuse, always with that smile that seemed reserved just for me. On the third visit, he invited me for coffee after my shift. I accepted, of course. What girl wouldn't? At the diner, he told me about his life. He said he was an only child, that his parents had passed away, that he studied business administration, but preferred to work traveling, seeing new places. He spoke with such conviction, with so many details. How could I suspect that every word was a meticulously constructed lie? In 2 weeks, we were dating. My Aunt Martha was suspicious of him. This young man appeared very suddenly, Eleanor. And why would a man from the big city be interested in a simple small-town girl? She questioned. But I was in love, blinded by the attention Walter gave me. For the first time in my life, I felt special, desired, and honestly, part of me believed it was my beauty that attracted him, not my inheritance. After 3 intense months of dating, he proposed to me. It was on a Sunday, after church. He knelt in the town square, in front of the entire town, and offered me a ring with a small stone that sparkled in the sun. "Eleanor, you are the woman of my life. I want to build a future by your side. Will you marry me?" he said with tears in his eyes. Fake tears, I know now, but at that moment, they seemed like definitive proof of his love. The wedding took place in October of that same year. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple ceremony at the main church, followed by a small reception in the parish hall. Walter insisted he didn't want anything extravagant. "What matters is our love, not the celebration," he would say. In reality, now I know he wanted to avoid drawing too much attention or risking someone from his past recognizing him. At first, our marriage seemed like a dream. We moved into the house my godmother had left me. Walter continued his commercial representation trips, but now he always came back to me. He brought small gifts, told stories of the cities he visited, made plans for our future. I felt like the happiest woman in the world. Soon he suggested we should think about investing my inheritance money. "This money sitting in the bank won't give us security for the future, my love," he explained with that calm and convincing voice. "I know good deals. We can multiply this value." I trusted him completely. After all, he was my husband, the man who had sworn to love and protect me before God. His work trips started to get longer. At first, they were 2 or 3 days, then a whole week. Eventually, they lasted up to 15 days. I stayed home alone, missing him, believing he was working hard for our future. He wrote affectionate letters to me, called when he was in larger cities that had long-distance telephone service. Gradually, I began to notice small changes in our daily life. Important documents about the house and the inheritance began to disappear from the drawer where we kept them. Walter insisted I sign papers without really explaining what they were about. "They're just bureaucracies for our investments, darling. You trust me, don't you?" he would say, kissing my forehead. And I signed. Of course I signed. The money in the joint account we had opened decreased rapidly. When I questioned it, Walter always had convincing explanations. "We're investing in land in Louisville," or "I bought shares in a promising company." I never saw these lands, never received proof of these shares, but I believed because I wanted to believe, because love makes us foolish, makes us see only what we want to see. We completed 1 year of marriage in October 1963. To celebrate, Walter took me for a trip to Louisville, something I had always dreamed of. We stayed in a simple hotel, but to me, it was paradise. "Soon we'll be able to stay in the best hotels in the country," he promised. "Our investments are growing, my love. Soon we'll be very rich." That night, while we were dining at a riverside restaurant, Walter received a phone call at the hotel. When he returned to the table, he said he needed to travel the next morning. An important client in Louisville needed him urgently. Our romantic weekend ended before it even began. I returned to Pine Grove alone, sad but understanding. After all, it was his work that supported us, right? What I didn't know was that while I was traveling back home by bus, sitting next to strangers with my heart aching with longing, Walter was heading to his real home in Louisville, to the arms of his wife Regina and their 3 children, who celebrated each new successful con by their father, who laughed at the small-town fool who was financing the construction of the mansion where they would soon live, who were already planning how to spend the rest of my inheritance when everything was complete. But life has its own plans, doesn't it? And the truth, no matter how much we try to bury it, always finds a way to come to light. My discovery would come in a way that even Walter, with all his meticulous planning, could not have predicted. The discovery of the truth arrived like lightning on a clear day. It was March 1964, almost a year and a half after our wedding. Winter was already saying goodbye, giving way to an early spring that filled Pine Grove's gardens with flowers. I was at Mr. Thompson's market doing shopping for the week when a gray-haired lady approached me. She had been watching me from a distance for a few minutes, with a look that mixed curiosity and pity. I thought perhaps she was an acquaintance of my late godmother. "Are you Eleanor? Eleanor Miller?" she asked, holding a shopping bag against her chest. I confirmed, a bit surprised that a stranger knew my name. Her wrinkled face twisted into a sad smile before saying the words that would change my life forever. "Dear, my name is Olivia Hoffman. I'm visiting my sister here in Pine Grove, and, well, I recognized you from a photograph. We need to talk about your husband, Walter." My heart raced. 1,000 thoughts went through my head. Was he a widower, as he had told me? Did he have children he was hiding? Debts? Some crime in his past? Nothing prepared me for what was to come next. I agreed to have coffee with Mrs. Hoffman at the corner bakery. With trembling hands, she told me she was the mother of Marcia, Walter's former boss at the pharmaceutical company in Louisville, where he had indeed worked for a few months in 1961. But he wasn't a commercial representative, as he told me. He was just a counter salesman who was fired on suspicion of embezzlement. My daughter was surprised when she found out he had married you. Surprised because Walter is already married, my dear. He has a wife and 3 children in Louisville. The family has lived there for more than 15 years. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The coffee cup I was holding slipped from my hands, breaking into 1,000 pieces on the bakery floor, exactly like my heart at that moment. "You must be mistaken," I stammered as the bakery owner rushed to clean up the mess. "Walter told me about his past, about his family." Mrs. Hoffman held my hands tightly. Her eyes overflowed with compassion. "Dear, I came here because I discovered something terrible. My sister works as a maid in the neighboring house, Regina's, Walter's wife. For weeks, she has been hearing comments about a plan. Walter married you to take your inheritance. The whole family knows about it. Regina brags to the neighbors about how soon they will have a new, luxurious house, thanks to the money from the small-town fool." I couldn't breathe. Flashes of memory invaded my mind. Walter insisting on managing our finances, the missing documents, the signatures he requested without explanations, the long absences, each piece of the puzzle fitting into a horrible picture of betrayal. "They are building a large house in the outskirts of Louisville with your money," continued Mrs. Hoffman, mercilessly honest. "Regina even chose the curtains, they say. The children tell their school friends that soon they will have a swimming pool, all funded by their father's special work." I left the bakery stumbling, ignoring Mrs. Hoffman's calls. I needed to be alone. I needed to think. I walked aimlessly through the streets of Pine Grove, passing by the church where I got married, the square where Walter proposed to me. Every place now contaminated by a lie. I returned home and for the first time began to search, really search, for evidence. In the office that Walter had transformed into his private space and asked me not to touch, not to disorganize his work papers, I found a false bottom in a drawer. There were duplicates of some documents I had signed, money transfers, powers of attorney, even a preliminary deed for the sale of the house. The pain was so intense that I fell to my knees, hugging those papers against my chest. I cried until I had no more tears, until my eyes burned and my throat was dry. I felt humiliated, betrayed, used. How could I have been so blind? How did I not notice the signs? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, reviewing every moment of our 18 months of marriage. Every caress, every promise, every "I love you." All lies, all part of a cruel plan to rob me. In the morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Walter immediately. If he was capable of lying so naturally for so long, he would certainly invent some story to justify the documents I found. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand exactly what was happening before I acted. With the little money I still had access to, I hired a private detective from Louisville. I had to sell some jewelry that belonged to my mother to pay for his services, but it would be worth it. I needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The detective, Mr. Guthrie, was a discreet man of few words. He promised to investigate Walter and his life in Louisville, but warned me it would take a few weeks. "You should act normally meanwhile," he advised. "If your husband suspects you know something, he may accelerate his plans or disappear with what he's already gotten." Following that advice was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. When Walter returned from his work trip, receiving him with a smile, hearing his lies, sleeping next to him, knowing that in another city there was an entire family mocking me, required a strength I didn't know I possessed. Each new day, I played the role of the loving and naive wife. I prepared his favorite meals, listened with feigned interest to his invented stories, allowed his kisses and nightly caresses while swallowing the disgust I felt. Inside, I was dying a little each hour, but outside I maintained the same Eleanor as always. 3 weeks passed like this, in silent torture. Then, Mr. Guthrie returned with a thick envelope of documents. I met with him in Louisville during a supposed visit to a non-existent cousin I had invented for Walter. The contents of the envelope confirmed my worst fears. there were photographs of Regina's house in Louisville, a modest but well-maintained building. Photos of Walter coming and going from there, hugging a blonde woman and 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The oldest must have been about 12, the youngest no more than 6, a family established a long time ago. But the worst was in the following photos. A large construction underway on the outskirts of the city. The detective had managed to photograph a small sign on the property. Future residents of the Miller family, coming soon. Miller, Walter's surname, the mansion that my inheritance was financing. There were also copies of documents, Walter and Regina's marriage certificate, dated 1948. He was only 20 years old at the time. Birth certificates of the children, and, most painfully, recent bank transfers from accounts in my name to accounts in the name of Regina Miller. "They've already transferred almost half of your assets, ma'am," explained the detective, pointing to the values in the statements. "They're doing it little by little, probably to avoid raising suspicions. At this rate, in 6 more months, they will have emptied everything." I felt nausea rising in my throat. It wasn't just the money, which alone would be terrible. It was the calculated cruelty, the coldness with which that family planned to leave me with nothing. "There's one more thing," continued Mr. Guthrie, hesitant. "I talked to some people in Louisville, pretending to be interested in doing business with Walter. I discovered he's done this before. About 5 years ago, he married a widow in Cincinnati, transferred everything she had to his name, and disappeared. The poor lady was left in misery. She had to move in with relatives. That was the last straw. It wasn't just a con against me. It was a modus operandi, a scheme he repeated with professional coldness. How many other women had been his victims? How many others had lost everything, as I was about to lose? "What do you intend to do?" asked the detective as I leafed through the photos with trembling hands. What did I intend to do? 1,000 thoughts went through my head. I could confront him, demand explanations that would certainly come in the form of more lies. I could report him to the police, but in the 60s, cases like this were rarely taken seriously. "Couple problems," they would say. I could simply run away, leave everything behind, and start over somewhere else before he left me with nothing. But then, looking at those photos, at the smiling face of that man I thought I knew, something changed inside me. A strange calm took over my being. The naive and passionate Eleanor died at that instant, giving way to a woman determined not to be just another victim on Walter Miller's list. "I'm going to get back what is mine," I finally replied, "or make sure he never does this to any other woman." On the bus back to Pine Grove, I worked out my plan. It wouldn't be easy. It would require courage and composure. But if Walter could lie and act for almost 2 years, I could also play his game, at least for long enough to turn the tables. When I got home, I found a bouquet of roses on the living room table and a note from Walter warning that he had to travel again for work, but would return in a week with a special surprise for me. I smiled at the emptiness of the house, a smile that had nothing sweet or innocent about it. "The surprise will be yours, my dear," I murmured, tearing the note into little pieces. "The surprise will be all yours." Little did Walter know that while he spent that week with his family in Louisville, planning the next steps of the con, I worked tirelessly to disarm his trap and that the foolish, manipulable wife he thought he had left at home no longer existed. That week of Walter's absence was the most productive of my life. I didn't waste a single minute on lamentations. The time for tears had passed. Now was the time to act. With the evidence gathered by Detective Guthrie, I sought out Mr. Norton, the only lawyer in Pine Grove. He was a middle-aged man, respected in town, who had handled my godmother's estate. I entered his office above the barber shop on Main Street, with my heart racing but determined. I remember the smell of old paper and the sound of the ceiling fan spinning lazily on that hot afternoon. I placed the envelope with the evidence on his desk and told him everything. "Mrs. Miller, this is very serious," he said, after examining the documents. "Your husband has committed various crimes, document forgery, fraud, bigamy. We can take him to justice." "And how long would that process take, sir?" I asked. And what are the real chances of recovering my money? Mr. Norton's silence was more eloquent than any answer. We both knew that the justice system of the 60s rarely favored women in situations like mine. Even with compelling evidence, the process would be long, expensive, and without guarantee of results. I need a more immediate solution, I explained. I want to reverse the fraudulent transfers before it's too late, and I want to ensure he can no longer use my name for new transactions. We spent hours discussing legal strategies. Mr. Norton made calls to colleagues in Louisville, consulted dusty legal codes, drafted documents. By the end of the day, we had a plan to protect what I still had left and recover part of what had already been transferred. "You'll need his signature on some documents," explained the lawyer. "Without it, it will be much more difficult to reverse certain transfers." "Leave that to me, sir," I replied with a confidence that surprised us both. "He won't suspect anything until it's too late." The next day, I went to the bank. The manager, Mr. Mitchell, was a friend of my late father and had known me since I was a little girl. I explained the situation, showing the evidence I had. His expression went from disbelief to indignation. "I always found it strange how that young man appeared out of nowhere and married you so quickly," he confessed. "But I never imagined something so vile." With Mr. Mitchell's help, I managed to block new transfers from the joint accounts and redeem some investments that were in my name, but which Walter had already provided documents to transfer. It wasn't everything, but at least it would prevent him from continuing to rob me. The next step was more painful. I had to tell the truth to my Aunt Martha. She always suspected Walter, but respected my choice and kept her suspicions to herself. When I revealed the extent of the betrayal, she cried with me, hugging me as she did when I was a child. "My child, you have the right to suffer, but you don't have the luxury of despair," she said, wiping away my tears. "Now is the time to be strong." Martha suggested I stay at her house while resolving the situation, but I refused. If I left my house, Walter would realize something was wrong as soon as he returned. I needed to maintain appearances until the right moment. I spent the following days preparing every detail of my plan. I visited the notary office and, with Mr. Norton's help, registered a power of attorney revoking any previous document that gave Walter powers over my assets. I also filed for a marriage annulment that would remain suspended until I decided to proceed. On the eve of Walter's return, I received a call from Detective Guthrie. He had discovered something important. "Mrs. Miller, Walter is selling the land you inherited in Pine Grove. He already has an interested buyer, a businessman from Louisville who wants to build a hotel on the site. The transaction is scheduled for next week." That information almost made me collapse. The land was the most valuable part of my inheritance, valued at a small fortune due to its privileged location. If Walter completed that sale, I would lose practically everything. "He'll need my signature for that," I said, trying to calm myself. "Actually, ma'am, he already has it. I found copies of the documents prepared for the sale. Your signature is there, or rather, a forgery of it." My blood froze. Walter had forged my signature on official documents. This explained why he always insisted I sign several papers at once. He was collecting models of my handwriting to be able to reproduce it. That discovery changed everything. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't risk losing the land. I needed to act the moment Walter returned. And he returned, as promised, exactly 1 week later. He arrived late in the afternoon, bringing gifts as he always did. French perfume, fine chocolates, a silk scarf, small crumbs to keep me content and distracted while he executed the main con. "I missed you, my love," he said, kissing me as if he really loved me. I forced a smile, playing my part one last time. "I missed you too. I prepared something special for dinner." And I really had prepared a beautiful table, candles, wine, his favorite dish, a perfect staging for what was to come. During dinner, Walter talked about his work trip, inventing stories about clients and business. I listened, smiled, asked questions at the right moments, but my thoughts were in the dresser drawer, where I kept all the documents that proved his betrayal, along with the papers Mr. Norton had prepared. "Darling, I have a surprise for you," I announced. filling his wine glass for the third time. Walter loved wine, especially when he wasn't the one paying for it. Remember I mentioned a distant uncle who lived in Tennessee? I received a letter from him this week. Walter raised his eyebrows, interested. I had never mentioned such an uncle, but he couldn't know that. In almost 2 years of marriage, I had talked very little about my family. An uncle? You never told me about him. That's because we hadn't been in contact for years. He had a falling out with my father, and they went to live in different states, but now he found out about my godmother's death and got in touch with me. And what was the surprise he brought? Asked Walter, his eyes shining with poorly disguised greed. He left an inheritance for me, much larger than Godmother Celeste's. Land in Nashville, a house in Memphis, and a considerable amount of money. I saw the gleam in his eyes intensify. He was like a predator sniffing out easy prey. At that moment, all the pain I felt transformed into a cold determination. This man would not destroy me. I would not be one more on the list of women he had ruined. "That's wonderful, my love," he exclaimed, taking my hands in his. "When will you receive all this?" "I'm already arranging the documentation. In fact, I need you to sign some papers to help with the transfer. Since we're married, the lawyer said it would facilitate the process." Of course, I can sign right now." His eagerness was almost comical. I got up and went to the bedroom, returning with a folder of documents. I placed it on the table and took out the first papers, exactly the ones Mr. Norton had prepared to reverse the fraudulent transfers and block any future attempt to manipulate my assets. Walter didn't even read them. He was so excited about the prospect of a new fortune to steal that he signed everything I put in front of him, page after page. When he finished, I carefully put the documents back in the folder. "Is that all?" he asked, disappointed that it had ended so quickly. "Almost everything. There's just one more thing." I went back to the bedroom and returned with the large envelope that Detective Guthrie had given me. I placed it on the table and pushed it toward Walter. "What is this?" he asked, curiously. "Open it and find out." With a confident smile, he opened the envelope. His face changed as he examined the contents. The photographs of him with Regina and the children, the house in Louisville, the construction of the mansion, the documents of the previous marriage, the bank transfers, everything. "Eleanor, I can explain," he began, but his voice failed. For the first time since I met him, Walter Miller was speechless. "There's nothing to explain," I interrupted, surprisingly calm. "I know everything about Regina, about your children, about the house you're building with my money. I know about the widow in Cincinnati whom you ruined. I know about the forgeries of my signature. I know you're selling my land next week." Walter turned pale. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed not to respond. "What? What do you intend to do?" he stammered. "I already did it. Those papers you just signed so eagerly, they have nothing to do with any uncle's inheritance. You just signed the transfer back of all the assets you stole from me, the revocation of any previous power of attorney, and the confession of various crimes, including forgery and fraud." He was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Then his face contorted into a mask of fury. He stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "You think you're so smart? You think you can deceive me like this? I'll end you." He advanced toward me, fists clenched. I didn't move. I knew he wouldn't have the courage to physically assault me, not out of consideration, but out of fear of the consequences. "Hit me, Walter," I challenged. "Add assault to the list of crimes. Mr. Norton is waiting for my phone call, confirming that I delivered the documents. If I don't call in the next 30 minutes, he'll go directly to the police with all the evidence." Walter stopped a few inches from me, his face red with anger, his eyes bloodshot. For a moment, I thought he would really assault me, but then I saw something I had never seen in those eyes before. Fear. "You don't understand," he tried, changing strategy. "Regina means nothing to me. I married her when I was very young. It was a mistake. It's you I truly love, Eleanor. We can work this out." I gave a bitter laugh. "Love? You don't know what that is. For you, love is just a tool, bait to attract your victims. I walked to the door and opened it. You have 24 hours to leave my house and my life. Take only your clothes and personal belongings. If you touch anything else, if you try another con, if you even threaten to return, this evidence goes straight to the police, to the newspapers, and to your dear family in Louisville. You can't do this, he protested, the arrogance returning. I'm your husband. Actually, you're not. Since you're still married to Regina, our marriage is null, and you just signed papers confirming that as well. His face twisted into an expression of hatred and despair. For a moment, I thought he would try to assault me again, but instead, Walter simply collapsed into a chair, defeated. What happens now? He asked in a weak voice. You leave, far away, and never try to contact me or get close to anything that belongs to me again. In exchange, I don't send this evidence to the authorities. And Regina? My children? I felt a pang of pity for the children. They weren't to blame for having a father like that, but I remembered that the whole family was involved in the con, even the little ones, laughing at the small-town fool. That's your problem. I suggest you get a real job to support them instead of living at the expense of innocent women. That night, I slept in the guest room, locked from the inside. In the middle of the night, I heard Walter rummaging through the house, probably looking for money or valuables to take, but I had already hidden everything important. When I woke up the next morning, he had already left. He only left a crumpled note on the kitchen table. You'll regret this. I wasn't scared. I knew it was just the last gasp of a defeated man. In the days that followed, I set about reorganizing my life. With Mr. Norton's help, I managed to reverse most of the fraudulent transfers. I didn't recover everything. Part of the money had already been spent on the construction of the mansion, but I saved enough to start over. The hardest part was facing the looks and whispers of small-town Pine Grove. Everyone wanted to know why the perfect husband had left so suddenly. I made up a story about him receiving an irrefutable job offer abroad. Few believed it, but no one dared to question directly. In June 1964, 3 months after Walter's departure, I learned that the construction of the mansion in Louisville had been halted due to non-payment. Detective Guthrie, whom I kept hired as a precaution, informed me that Regina and the children continued in the old house and that Walter had disappeared. Apparently, he had debts with dangerous people in the city, money he had probably borrowed to keep up appearances while executing his con against me. It was at that moment, looking at the detective's final report, that I realized that chapter of my life had ended. Walter and his betrayal were now just a painful but closed scar, and I was free to write a new story. July 1964 marked the beginning of my new life. After Walter disappeared, I spent weeks reorganizing not just my finances, but also my thoughts. The nights were long, the silence of the house sometimes deafening. There were moments when, even knowing the whole truth, I missed his presence. Not the real man, that cruel con artist, but the illusion I had loved, the husband who existed only in my imagination. One afternoon, while tidying the room to remove the last vestiges of him, I found a box with photographs from our wedding. I looked at that 23-year-old girl, radiant in her simple white dress, eyes shining with hope. Beside her, a smiling man playing the role of his life. For an instant, I wanted to tear up those photos, burn them until nothing remained. But then I decided to keep them, not out of nostalgia or love, but as a reminder that I would never allow anyone to manipulate me again. That Eleanor died, I said to the mirror that night. It's time to discover who I am now. The first decision was about the house, too big for me alone, full of memories I preferred to forget. I put it up for sale, and in a few weeks a buyer appeared, a doctor from Louisville, who intended to transform it into a small clinic. The offered price was fair and the transaction quick. With the money from the sale and what I managed to recover from the fraudulent transfers, I bought a smaller, cozier house on the outskirts of Pine Grove. I also set aside a considerable portion as a reserve, a lesson I learned the hard way. But just changing houses wasn't enough. I needed to occupy my mind. I needed a purpose. Since I was a girl, I always had skill with sewing. My mother taught me when I was only 8 years old, and during adolescence, I used to do small repairs for neighbors and acquaintances. It was something that gave me pleasure, that allowed me to create with my hands. "Why not turn it into a business?" suggested my Aunt Martha during one of her visits. "You've always had talent, and Pine Grove hasn't had a quality seamstress since Mrs. Sullivan moved." The idea seemed absurd at first. Me, a newly separated woman, opening my own business in 1964 in small and traditional Pine Grove would be cause for more gossip, more sideways glances. But the more I thought about it, the more the idea appealed to me. It would be a form of independence, of showing myself and everyone that I could rebuild my life with my own hands. In September of that year, I opened Eleanor's Atelier in a small room that I adapted in the front of my new house. I started modestly, with repairs, hemming pants, simple adjustments. I placed an ad in the local newspaper and waited. In the first few days, almost no clients appeared. The few women who came seemed more interested in meeting the poor thing who was abandoned by her husband than in my sewing services. "It will pass, my child," Aunt Martha consoled me. "Soon they will notice your talent and forget the gossip." She was right. Gradually, the quality of my work began to speak louder than the rumors. One satisfied client brought another. Soon, in addition to repairs, I started receiving orders for new clothes, dresses for special occasions, suits for the men in town, children's clothes for First Communion. The real turning point happened in December 1964. Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife, ordered a dress for the City Hall's Christmas party. She was a demanding woman, known for her refined taste and for the clothes she had made in Louisville. I worked day and night on that dress, applying all my knowledge and creativity. When she tried on the finished piece and looked in the mirror, her eyes sparkled. "Eleanor, this is magnificent. I couldn't get anything like this even in Louisville." At the Christmas party, everyone commented on Mrs. Henderson's dress. The next day, my atelier was full of ladies wanting to order similar clothes. Suddenly, I was no longer the poor, abandoned woman. I was the talented seamstress of Pine Grove. With increased demand, I needed to hire help. Julia, a 17-year-old girl who had just finished high school, became my first assistant. I taught her everything I knew, and soon she was managing her own set of clients. In the following months, I hired 2 more girls. The small atelier in front of my house was no longer enough. In 1966, with the business thriving, I rented a larger space on the town's main street. Now it was a real establishment with a display window, a fitting room, and space for 4 seamstresses to work simultaneously. I called it Eleanor's House of Fashion. I didn't have the imagination for more elaborate names, but the simplicity worked in my favor. It was during this time that I began to notice a change in the market. Fashion magazines arriving from New York and Los Angeles showed more modern, more daring trends. The 60s brought novelties like miniskirts, psychedelic prints, vibrant colors, and my clients, even the most conservative ones in Pine Grove, began to show interest in these novelties. I saw an opportunity. Instead of just copying models from magazines, I began to create my own interpretations of the trends. Dresses that maintained traditional elegance, but with modern touches. Skirts that weren't as short as the miniskirts in the magazines, but that brought a youthful freshness. I created a unique identity for my creations, something that blended the traditional small-town style with the modernity of the big cities. The success was immediate. Soon, it wasn't just the ladies of Pine Grove who sought me out, but also women from neighboring towns. In 1968, I received my first client from Louisville, a university professor who heard about my work through a friend. She was so satisfied that she returned the following month with 2 colleagues. The year 1969 marked another expansion. With the atelier operating at maximum capacity, I decided to take a bold step and open a small clothing factory. It was no longer viable to produce only made-to-measure clothes. I needed to create pieces in series, albeit on a small scale. I rented a warehouse on the outskirts of town, bought more sewing machines, and hired 10 employees. "Are you sure about this?" asked the bank manager, Mr. Mitchell, when I went to request a loan for expansion. "It's a considerable investment for a woman alone." He hesitated on the last part, as if being a woman and managing a business were incompatible things. "I'm absolutely certain," I replied, with a confidence that admitted no questioning. "And I'm not alone. I have a team of talented women with me." The loan was approved, although with higher interest rates than it would have been for a man in the same situation. I didn't care. I knew I could pay it, and more, I knew that success would be the best response to that kind of prejudice. Eleanor's Fashion began its activities in January 1970. We started with a basic line: dresses, skirts, blouses, and some tailored suits for the executive women who were beginning to emerge in the job market. Quality was our differential. We used better fabrics, more meticulous finishes, more original designs than the larger factories in the big cities. The first months were difficult. Producing in series required different logistics, larger investments, more responsibilities. There were nights when I wondered if I hadn't risked too much, if I shouldn't have continued with the atelier that was already established and profitable. But then I remembered Walter, how he underestimated me, how he thought I was just a small-town fool, easy to manipulate. Those memories renewed my determination. If he thought I would be an easy victim, I'll prove I'm a businesswoman hard to beat, I promised myself during the late-night work sessions. In mid-1970, we received an order that would change everything. A department store in Louisville wanted an exclusive collection of 30 dresses for the spring season. It was the largest order we had ever received, and the deadline was tight. We worked day and night, all employees doing overtime, I myself cutting fabrics and supervising every detail. We delivered the dresses 2 days before the deadline. A week later, the store manager called. All models had been sold in 3 days. They wanted to order more, double the quantity for the next season. The news spread quickly in the small world of fashion in rural Kentucky. Other department stores contacted us wanting to see our pieces. By December of that year, we were producing for 5 different establishments, including a sophisticated store in Nashville. 1971 brought new expansions. I hired 15 more employees, bought more modern equipment, increased the factory space. I also hired a young designer, newly graduated from New York, to help me with the creations. I could no longer do everything alone. "You're building an empire, Ms. Eleanor," commented Julia, my first assistant, who was now production manager. "Who would have thought that from that small room in front of your house all this would be born? Who would have thought, indeed?" Sometimes I myself was surprised when visiting the factory and seeing so many women working, so many machines running, so many pieces being produced with the Eleanor's Fashion label. It was an indescribable feeling of pride, not just for the material success, but for having transformed a personal tragedy into something positive that generated jobs and supported families. In 1972, at 33 years old, I was officially a successful businesswoman. Eleanor's Fashion was no longer just a local clothing factory. Our products reached 3 states in the South. I had a team of nearly 40 employees, a design department with 3 designers, and plans to open our own store in Louisville. It was in that year that I received an unexpected visit. I was in the factory office reviewing models for the winter collection when my secretary announced, "Ms. Eleanor, there's a lady named Regina Miller wanting to speak with you." The name hit me like a punch to the stomach. Regina Miller, Walter's wife, the woman who was willing to ruin my life to build her dream mansion. For a moment, I thought about sending her away. What right did she have to appear there after everything? But curiosity spoke louder. I asked them to show her in. The woman who entered my office wasn't the Regina I had imagined based on the detective's photographs. That one had been a blonde, beautiful woman of prosperous appearance. This was a shadow, too thin, dull hair, deep dark circles, simple and worn clothes. The years had not been kind to her. Ms. Eleanor, she began, her voice trembling. I know I have no right to be here, but I didn't let her finish, not out of anger, but because I realized she was about to collapse. I offered her a chair, a glass of water. For a few minutes, we sat in silence, just observing each other. Two women whose lives had been united and transformed by the same man in such different ways. Walter abandoned us, she finally said. Soon after what happened with you, he discovered the police were looking for him for other frauds, took what little money we had, and disappeared. I've been alone with the children for almost 8 years. I didn't feel the satisfaction I imagined I would feel upon hearing that. Just a heavy sadness for the destruction that man had caused to so many lives, including his own children's. Why did you come looking for me? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Because I need work, she replied, her eyes fixed on the floor. No one in Louisville wants to hire me. They all know who I am, what we did. I heard that you have a factory that employs many women. I thought that maybe... That afternoon in 1972, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I offered Regina a job, not in Pine Grove, where her presence would cause gossip and reopen wounds, but in the new branch we were opening in Nashville. A fresh start for her, away from the past, away from the memories of Walter. Why? She asked, incredulous. After everything we did to you. I'm not doing this for you, I replied honestly. I'm doing it for your children who didn't ask to have a father like Walter. And I'm doing it for myself, because I learned that the best revenge is living well, building something positive from the destruction he tried to cause. When Regina left my office that afternoon, I felt a weight leaving my shoulders. A chapter that was half open finally closed. Walter Miller, the man who almost destroyed me, had become irrelevant. I had moved on, built something bigger than anything he could have imagined. And that, I realized, was the true victory. Not just having survived the betrayal, but having thrived despite it, having turned pain into strength, humiliation into determination, loss into gain. That night, looking out the window of my office at the illuminated factory where dozens of women worked under the Eleanor's fashion symbol, I smiled to myself. The naive young woman who almost lost everything to a con artist had transformed into a respected businesswoman, an independent woman, a success story. And the story was just beginning. The following years were of constant growth and learning. The 1970s brought challenges and opportunities I never imagined facing when I started with my small atelier. America was experiencing significant changes, with the women's liberation movement gaining ground, changing fashion trends and consumer habits. In 1973, I opened the first Eleanor's fashion store in Louisville. I was nervous on opening night, fearing that no one would show up or that the customers from the city would find my models too provincial. To my surprise and joy, the store was packed. Women appreciated exactly what I offered. Well-made pieces with personality that weren't mere copies of international trends. Your dresses have soul, Ms. Eleanor, commented an influential client, wife of a local politician. They're not like these models that come from New York, all the same, without identity. That comment made me reflect on what really differentiated my creations. I realized that I unconsciously incorporated elements of Southern culture in my designs, colors, patterns, cuts that referred to the traditions of the region, something subtle, but that gave the pieces an authenticity that clients recognized, even without identifying exactly what it was. I decided then to explore this differential more consciously. I hired local artisans to create exclusive details for our clothes. Embroidery inspired by Southern tradition, applications that referred to Appalachian folk costumes, but all reinterpreted in a contemporary way. We created a line called Southern Essence, which became our flagship. The success was so great that in 1975, we opened 2 more stores, one in Nashville and another in Atlanta. The factory in Pine Grove could no longer handle the demand. I built a new building 3 times larger on the outskirts of town. Now we employed more than 100 women just in production, not counting the saleswomen in the stores and the administrative team. "You saved Pine Grove," the mayor told me during the inauguration of the new building. "Before your factory, our young women had to leave to find work. Now they have a future right here." It wasn't an exaggeration. Eleanor's Fashion had become the largest employer in the region, especially of female labor. We even created a daycare for the employees to leave their children while they worked, something practically unheard of for the time, especially in a small town. It was during this period that I began to receive purchase offers. Businessmen from New York, realizing the potential of the brand, offered considerable values to acquire the company. Some suggested partnerships where I would maintain part of the control but would have access to capital for even greater expansion. "You should consider it," advised the accountant, a pragmatic man who had taken care of the company's finances since the beginning. "The market is heated now, but we don't know what the future holds. It would be a way to secure your assets." I understood his logic, but something inside me resisted. Eleanor's Fashion wasn't just a business for me. It was my identity, my redemption, the symbol of the woman I became after Walter's betrayal. Selling the company, even for an extraordinary value, seemed like a way of abdicating this new Eleanor that cost me so much to build. In 1976, I made a different decision. Instead of selling to external investors, I created a profit-sharing program for long-term employees. Women who had been with me for more than 5 years started to receive, besides their salary, a small percentage of the company's results. It wasn't a formal partnership, but a recognition that the success of Eleanor's Fashion was the result of joint work. "You're crazy," exclaimed the accountant when I explained the plan. "No company does this. It will diminish your profits." "I prefer smaller profits with a committed team than larger profits with dissatisfied employees," I replied. "Besides, I'm not doing this just out of kindness. It's business strategy. Those who have a stake in the results work with more dedication." I was right. In the following years, productivity increased, staff turnover decreased, and the quality of the pieces improved even more. The employees felt truly part of the business, suggested improvements, took care to reduce waste. What I lost in percentage of profit, I gained in overall growth. The end of the 1970s brought new challenges. The American economy was beginning to show signs of exhaustion, inflation was increasing, and the purchasing power of the middle class, our main audience, was decreasing. Many smaller clothing factories closed their doors, unable to adapt to more difficult times. We needed a strategy to survive. After many nights of reflection and discussions with my team, we decided on a bold approach. Instead of lowering quality to reduce prices, as many competitors did, we maintained our standard but created differentiated lines for diverse audiences. For clients with higher purchasing power, we launched the Eleanor Collection, with exclusive, almost artisanal pieces sold in special departments of our stores. For the broader audience, we maintained the regular line, with small adjustments to control costs, without compromising essential quality. And innovating once more, we created Eleanor Young, aimed at the daughters of our traditional clients, more accessible pieces with modern designs that introduced the brand to a new generation. The strategy worked. While the textile sector faced a generalized crisis, Eleanor's Fashion continued to grow, albeit at a more modest pace. In 1979, we were invited to participate in the first edition of an important fashion event in New York. A recognition that we had transcended the status of regional brand to become a nationally respected name. I remember being backstage at that fashion show, watching professional models wearing creations that were born from my small atelier in Pine Grove. A journalist approached wanting an interview. "Ms. Eleanor, how do you feel seeing your brand on this stage alongside international labels?" she asked, microphone in hand. I looked at the models preparing, at the carefully crafted clothes, at the Eleanor's Fashion logo, illuminated in the background of the stage. And for an instant I saw beyond all that. I saw the young pharmacy clerk, naive and in love. I saw the betrayed and humiliated woman. I saw the determined entrepreneur rebuilding her life. "I feel it was worth it," I replied simply. Every tear, Every sleepless night, every obstacle overcome, it was all worth it. The 1980s arrived bringing even greater turbulence for the American economy. Inflation soared, economic recession hit hard. The purchasing power of the population decreased month by month. For a company in the clothing sector, these were especially difficult times. Many fellow entrepreneurs closed their doors, unable to deal with the increasing production costs and reduction in sales. Others sold to larger groups at prices much lower than they were worth years before. The pressure for me to do the same increased. "Ms. Eleanor, you've built something admirable, but perhaps it's time to secure what you've conquered," insisted the accountant, now with gray hair like mine. "The times are uncertain." Again, I refused the purchase offers. Instead, I sought adaptation. I realized that in times of crisis, people buy less, but value durability and versatility more. We reformulated our collections to offer timeless pieces that could be used on multiple occasions and for several seasons. We also innovated in the way of selling. In 1983, we were one of the first American clothing companies to create a catalog sales system. Our representatives visited homes and offices, showing the catalog and collecting orders. It was a way to bring Eleanor's fashion to clients who couldn't or didn't want to go to the stores, either due to lack of time or for being in cities where we didn't have a physical presence. The system was an immense success, especially in the rural South, where access to quality clothing was limited. Soon, we had hundreds of representatives, mainly women who sought extra income or schedule flexibility. Many were housewives, teachers, public employees who sold in their spare time. Some became so successful that they abandoned their original professions to dedicate themselves exclusively to the sales of Eleanor's fashion catalogs. In 1985, at 46 years old, I was invited to give a lecture at the Louisville Chamber of Commerce on female entrepreneurship. It was the first time I was seen not just as a successful businesswoman, but as an example to be followed by other women. The auditorium was packed, mainly with young women who dreamed of having their own business. "How did you manage to overcome so many obstacles and build a company of this size, especially being a woman in an era when few entrepreneured?" asked a young woman in the audience. I reflected for a moment before answering. I couldn't tell the whole truth, the story of Walter's betrayal and how it propelled me, but I could share the essence of what I learned. "Adversity can be our greatest teacher," I replied. "When we face difficulties that seem insurmountable, we discover an inner strength that we didn't know we possessed. The secret is not to avoid problems, but to transform them into fuel to move forward." This philosophy guided Eleanor's fashion through the turbulent 1980s and early 1990s. While America faced economic challenges, changes in consumer behavior, and political shifts, we maintained our course, adapting without losing our essence. In 1992, at 53 years old, I received one of the greatest recognitions of my career, the Entrepreneur of the Year Award from the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. At the award ceremony, I looked at the audience full of business people, mostly men, and felt a deep satisfaction. It wasn't just a personal victory, but a recognition that a woman, starting from scratch, could build a respected company in a predominantly male environment. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of opening doors for other women. I announced the creation of the Eleanor Program for Female Empowerment, a company project to offer free professional courses to women in vulnerable situations. We started with industrial sewing courses, but soon expanded to administration, sales, and basic design. I believe that true success is not measured just by profits, but by the positive impact we generate in the lives of other people, I said as I closed my speech. This has always been and always will be the philosophy of Eleanor's fashion. The program was an immediate success. Hundreds of women enrolled. Many were single mothers, victims of domestic violence, or simply women who never had opportunities for study and qualification. The transformation stories that emerged from there deeply moved me. Women who, just like me, decades earlier, found in sewing and fashion a path to independence and dignity. In 1995, at 56 years old, I began to think about succession. I didn't have children to inherit the business, but I had something equally valuable, a team of talented women who had grown with the company. Julia, my first assistant, who is now production director. Marcia, who started as a saleswoman and became commercial manager. Helen, the young designer who revolutionized our collections in the 80s, and so many others. I created a gradual transition plan. I formed a management council with the oldest and most talented employees and began to transfer responsibilities to them. It wasn't a retirement. I would continue as president and visionary of the brand, but a recognition that Eleanor's Fashion had become larger than its founder. Today, at 84 years old, I look back and see the extraordinary journey that life has provided me. Eleanor's Fashion is no longer just mine. It belongs to the more than 200 women who work directly in the company and the thousands who over decades have passed through our factories, stores, and training programs. The small house in Pine Grove, where it all began, has been transformed into a museum that tells the story of the company and Southern fashion. Sometimes I visit the place discreetly, just to remember. I look at the old sewing machines, at the first models I created, at the black and white photographs of the first employees, and feel an immense gratitude for the path traveled. As for Walter, I learned many years later that he passed away in 1987 in obscure circumstances somewhere in Ohio. I felt neither joy nor sadness at the news, just the realization that that man, who once had so much power over my life, had become irrelevant. His attempt to destroy me ended up being the catalyst for my transformation and success. Regina continued working in our factories until she retired. We never became friends, but developed a mutual respect. Her children, whom I helped with scholarships, grew up and became decent adults, breaking the cycle of dishonesty of their father. The youngest, in fact, works today in the company's design department. If I could go back in time and talk to that young 23-year-old Eleanor, a pharmacy clerk dazzled by the charming traveler, what would I say? Perhaps nothing. Each step of that painful journey was necessary to transform me into the woman I became. The con that should have ruined me ended up being the foundation upon which I built not just a company, but a full and meaningful life. That man married me just to rob me, but I was the one who ended up rich. Rich not just in material terms, but rich in experience, in wisdom, in achievements. Rich for having transformed a story of betrayal into a story of triumph. Rich for having discovered that sometimes our greatest wounds can become our greatest strengths. And that, my dears, is the true wealth that no one will ever be able to steal from me. If you like this story of my life, don't forget to leave your like on this video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel if you haven't already. Also turn on notifications so you don't miss my next stories. Leave in the comments what you thought and where you're watching from. Thank you very much for staying with me until here. Until next time.